Our second reading this morning comes from the book of Acts, the very opening of that book. Luke sees these events apparently as significant enough that he tells a version of this story twice. The Gospel of Luke ends with an account of Jesus' ascension for the disciples, and when he begins his next book, the book of Acts, he rejoins that episode and starts there. So let us listen now for what the Spirit may say to us as we hear this account of the disciples with Jesus one last time. So when they had come together, they, the disciples, asked him, "Lord, is this the time when you will restore the kingdom to Israel?" He replied, "It is not for you to know the times or periods that the Father has set by his authority, but you will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, in all Judea and Samaria, and to the ends of the earth." When he had said this, as they were watching, he was lifted up, and a cloud took him out of their sight. While he was going, and they were gazing up towards heaven, suddenly two men in white robes stood by them. They said, "Men of Galilee, why do you stand looking up toward heaven? This Jesus who has been taken up from you into heaven will come in the same way as you saw him go into heaven." Then they returned to Jerusalem from the mount called Olivet, which is near Jerusalem, a Sabbath day's journey away. When they had entered the city, they went to the room upstairs where they were staying. Peter and John and James and Andrew, Philip and Thomas, Bartholomew and Matthew, James son of Alphaeus, and Simon the Zealot, and Judas son of James. All these were constantly devoting themselves to prayer, together with certain women, including Mary, the mother of Jesus, as well as his brothers. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Back in my days as a corporate pilot, when people would ask me about what I did for a living, I would sometimes say that I flew planes for free, but I got paid for waiting. Corporate pilots tend to take the executive somewhere early in the morning and then sit there all day long. And you get good at waiting. Some of the airports had collections of movies that you could check out and watch. Some even had sleep rooms where you could crash after a particularly early morning flight. I read a lot, and I would take my running gear. Some pilots always carried their golf clubs. We had ways to make the time pass quickly. Unfortunately, passengers could sometimes figure out ways to make the time pass slowly again. When there was a 5 o'clock departure, around 4 o'clock, I would start to get ready, put on the fuel, file a flight plan, put in the ice and coffee and any catering that we had, and then I would wait and hope that the people showed up somewhere near 5 o'clock. When they didn't show up until 7 o'clock, those 2 hours sometimes felt longer than the whole rest of the day. Now, one time after a particularly early morning flight, the CEO said, I've got a quick meeting and I've got to get right back. I'll be here by 9:30 a.m. And so I didn't take the book out or the shoes off the plane. I just got it fueled, filed a flight plan, topped off the ice and coffee, and began to wait. And I waited, and I waited, and waited. Around lunchtime, I thought I might run out to get a bite, but I dared not. I knew the minute I left, he'd show up ready to go at that instant. When he finally got there at 6:30 that night, he said, "We ran a little late." Oh, really, I thought, but I didn't say it. But I just smiled. said something about this is why you have your own airplane. And how many of you just love waiting? How many of you can't wait for the next trip to the driver's license renewal or to spend some quality time in the doctor's office waiting? And at least now you're not stuck with just those old magazines. You know, with a smartphone, you can check your email, read the paper, do something semi-productive. Because what is worse than waiting when you have no idea how long you're going to have to wait? Which is sort of where the disciples are left at the end of our story today. It takes place 40 days after Easter. And in that time, Jesus has been popping up regularly, meeting with the disciples, continuing to teach them about the kingdom, about the coming of God's new day. And he's told them to sit tight, to stay in Jerusalem and wait the promised coming of the Holy Spirit. Now, you'd think that these disciples would be a little sharper than they are at this point. They've been with Jesus for all that time, and now 40 more days after Easter, but still they ask, Lord, is this the time when you will restore the kingdom to Israel? I mean, all of that time, 40 days of post-Easter continuing education, and they still think maybe Jesus will show up and kick out the Romans and bring us back to the good old days of King David. But Jesus says, don't worry about that. He says that to them and to us. That's not your business. You're clearly not quite ready yet, but you're going to be my witnesses in all the world. When the power of the Spirit comes on you, you're going to be able to act and live and speak in ways so that people will see me in you. And then Jesus is gone, lifted out of the sight, and now the poor disciples really don't know what to do. They stand there, looking at the last place they glimpsed Jesus. And I've always wondered how long would they have just stayed there if the angels hadn't showed up. But then they go back to Jerusalem and they wait. But they don't just wait, they wait together, the entire community. And they pray together. I recently spent a week at something entitled the Festival of Homiletics. It's a fancy sounding name, isn't it? Festival of Homiletics. It's a preacher's conference. Homiletics is just a fancy word relating to sermons or homilies, as they're sometimes called. There were nearly 2,000 preachers signed up to attend this conference. And we heard some of the biggest names in the business lecturing to us on ways for us to be better preachers. And we also worshiped a lot, often 3 times a day. It was inspiring. We sang, we heard great music, we heard some of the most gifted preachers that there are in America and in other countries. It was wonderful. Pastors sometimes get a little worship starved. When you're leading worship, you often don't really get to worship. And so it's wonderful just to be a worshiper. And it's even more wonderful when there's 2,000 people singing in a cathedral and a who's who of preachers is opening your eyes to things you'd never seen and moving you to tears. And it's nearly impossible to come away from an event like this without being excited and inspired, and your head about to explode with sermon ideas and methods. But even so, at that very same time, I was struck by the fact that, I'm not Craig Barnes or Walter Brueggemann. or Brian McLaren, or Barbara Brown Taylor. No publishers are looking to get a hold of my sermons to put in a book. And as yet, no one has called asking me to be a speaker at next year's Festival of Homiletics. And pretty soon, the afterglow of that wonderful event will begin to fade in the daily grind. Besides, producing the sort of sermons I heard there is really hard work. And I have plenty to do. Like most of you, I have more stuff to do than the day's got time, and sermons are just one more production item to check off that has gotten done. And we live in a world that's all about production. We're supposed to work hard and work long because there's a lot to get done, a lot to learn. If you don't work hard and long, you won't get ahead where you're working, or you won't get ahead in school. Who knows, you might even get let go at the next round of budget cuts or the next round of layoffs. Work hard, work long hours, be productive. That's the world we live in. You'd better work hard. You better be the smartest person in the room. But of course, we can't all be the smartest person in the room. I can't help but wondering if the disciples felt that kind of pressure as Jesus disappears from view, those words about being his witnesses and all the world still echoing in their heads. Be Jesus' witnesses? Continue his ministry in the world? We don't even understand him half the time. We're not Jesus. No one's going to mistake us for Jesus. How on earth are we going to continue his ministry in the world? Now, I don't know, but if I'd been one of those disciples, I have a feeling I'd gone one of two ways. Probably I would have been so overwhelmed by the magnitude of the task Jesus had just laid on me, I'd have been paralyzed and I'd have done nothing. Or perhaps I would have been inspired by Jesus' promises and his teaching, and had thrown myself into the work that I thought he wanted me to do. But these disciples do neither. Instead, they wait and they pray. Wait and pray. They don't even do any planning. They just wait and pray. If they'd thrown their hands up in the air and said, "My God, we'll never be able to do all this," I'd have understood that. But wait and pray. Imagine for a moment that you're in some committee or group that's at a congregation somewhere, and there's some really serious issues facing the congregation, decisions that have to be made about the future direction of the place. And you go to the meeting about this, and the chair says, "I really feel like we need to pray about this, and so I want us to meet every week to pray. And I want you to get together with a few of the people on other nights that live near you and pray together." So I says, "And what else?" "Oh, nothing else. I just want you to pray." Pray about what? Just pray. For how long? I'm really not sure. We're just going to wait and pray. What are we praying for? What are we waiting for? We're waiting for God. How many of you think that sounds like a colossal waste of time? It strikes me initially that way. And I feel fairly confident that it would be viewed that way at the places where most of you work. Imagine your boss says, "Hey, what have you done today?" "Oh, I waited and prayed." "What about yesterday?" "Oh, I waited and prayed then too." "How about the day before?" "I waited and prayed." Of course, the disciples aren't at work. They're simply getting ready to become Jesus' witnesses, to take over his ministry, to found the church, spread it over the entire Mediterranean world. And they went back to Jerusalem, and they waited, and they prayed, somehow trusting Jesus' promise. You will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, in all Judea and Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. All praise and glory to the one who sends us the Spirit. Thanks be to God.